The rain poured heavily on a dimly lit street in Los Angeles, where a man in ragged clothes shuffled along the sidewalk. His hoodie was pulled low over his face, and his worn-out sneakers splashed through shallow puddles. To any passerby, he looked like another homeless man trying to survive another cruel night. But under the layers of disguise was Elon Musk, billionaire, inventor, and one of the most influential men in the world. Tonight, he was not himself. Elon had decided to conduct an experiment, one that his advisors had strongly opposed. "You're putting yourself in danger," they had argued. But Elon didn't listen. He had grown tired of the polished surfaces and curated interactions of his life. He wanted to see the real world, to experience how the vulnerable were treated, especially by those in authority. As he crossed the street, a patrol car turned the corner, its headlights slicing through the rain. Elon hesitated for a moment, adjusting his posture to appear weaker. He leaned against a lamppost, shivering, as the car slowed down. The two officers inside exchanged glances. The younger officer, with a buzz cut and an impatient demeanor, muttered, "Another one. Let's move him along." The older cop, a man with tired eyes, hesitated. "Wait, something feels off." The car came to a stop. The buzz-cut officer stepped out first, his boots splashing in the water. He approached Elon with the kind of confidence that came from years of knowing the system worked in his favor. "Hey, buddy, you can't hang around here. Move along." Elon raised his head slightly, just enough to meet the officer's eyes. "I'm not doing anything wrong," he replied, his voice deliberately shaky. The older officer stayed back, watching carefully. Something about the man's tone didn't sit right with him. There was no panic, no desperation, just a quiet defiance that didn't match his appearance. The younger officer wasn't interested in subtleties. "I said move," he barked, gripping Elon's arm. Elon winced but didn't resist. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly. "You're trespassing," the officer snapped. "This is private property." "It's a public street," Elon replied, his voice steadier now. The older officer stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "What's your name?" he asked, his tone less aggressive but probing. "Eli," Elon lied without hesitation. "Just Eli." The buzz-cut officer scoffed. "No ID, no proof. Let's take him in." But before they could act, a woman's voice rang out from across the street. "Hey, leave him alone." Both officers turned to see an elderly woman standing in the doorway of a small diner, clutching an umbrella. "He's not hurting anyone," she shouted. The younger officer rolled his eyes but loosened his grip. "Stay out of this, Mom," he warned. The older cop, however, seemed to be reassessing the situation. "Eli," he said carefully, "do you need help? Food? Shelter?" Elon's lips curled into the faintest smile, though he quickly hid it. "I'll be fine," he said. "Thanks for asking." The rain continued to fall, the tension thick in the air. Elon could feel the wheels turning in the older officer's mind, the subtle hints of doubt creeping in. But the younger cop wasn't done yet. "Let's run him through the system," he insisted. "We'll see if his story checks out." And just like that, Elon found himself being escorted to the patrol car, his experiment taking an unexpected turn. Little did the officers know, the man they were about to run through the system had more secrets than they could ever imagine. As the patrol car pulled away, Elon sat quietly in the back seat, his hands resting in his lap. The younger officer glanced at him through the rearview mirror, a smirk playing on his lips. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said. "But guts don't count for much out here." The older officer didn't say a word. He kept his eyes on the road, occasionally glancing at Elon in the rearview mirror, his curiosity growing. Something about this man didn't add up. His clothes screamed poverty, but his calm demeanor and articulate speech hinted at a deeper story. At the precinct, Elon was led inside, his soaked hoodie dripping onto the polished floors. A few officers glanced his way, but most didn't pay much attention. Homeless individuals being brought in wasn't exactly newsworthy. "Take a seat," the younger cop barked, pointing to a bench in the corner. Elon obeyed, sitting down and folding his hands in his lap. The officer began the usual routine, typing up a report and asking for Elon's information. "Full name," the officer demanded, not looking up from his screen. "Eli Morrison," Elon replied smoothly, sticking to the name he'd given earlier. "Date of birth." Elon paused, calculating quickly. "July 23rd, 1971, he said, picking a random date. The officer typed it in, then glanced up. "Got any ID on you?" Elon shook his head. "No, I don't." "Of course you don't," the officer muttered under his breath. He hit a few more keys, then leaned back in his chair. All right, we're running your name through the database. If there's anything on you, we'll find it. Elon nodded but said nothing. He knew they wouldn't find anything under the fake name, but he also knew this was just the beginning. He was curious to see how far they'd push, how they'd treat someone they believed to be powerless. As the officers waited for the search results, the older cop finally spoke up. "Where are you from, Eli?" he asked, his tone softer than his partner's. "Around," Elon replied vaguely. The cop frowned. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I've got," Elon said, meeting the man's gaze. The room fell silent for a moment, the only sound being the faint hum of the computer. Then the younger officer let out a frustrated sigh. This is a waste of time. He's probably just another drifter. But before the older officer could respond, the computer dinged. The younger cop leaned forward, his smirk returning. "Let's see what we've got here." He clicked through the results, his expression shifting from smug to confused. "No matches," he muttered. "Not even a parking ticket. That's weird." The older cop raised an eyebrow. "Clean record? For someone living on the streets?" "Doesn't make sense," the younger officer admitted, his confidence faltering. He turned to Elon, his suspicion growing. "Who the hell are you?" Elon didn't flinch. "Just a man trying to get by," he said simply. The older cop stared at him for a long moment, then turned to his partner. "Maybe we should let him go, if he's clean." "Not so fast," the younger officer interrupted. "Something's off about this guy, and I'm going to find out what." As the tension in the room grew, Elon leaned back against the wall, his mind already working through his next move. He had come here to test the system, and now the system was trying to test him. But what neither officer realized was that they were playing a game they couldn't possibly win. The younger officer, now more determined than ever, leaned forward, his tone shifting to something sharper. "Listen, Eli, or whoever you are, I've seen guys like you before. Drifters with a story that doesn't add up. You think you're smarter than the system, huh?" Elon raised an eyebrow, his calm expression unshaken. "I'm not trying to be smarter than anyone. You brought me here, remember?" The older officer, still standing near the desk, observed quietly. His instincts told him there was more to this man, but it wasn't danger he sensed, it was something else entirely. "Maybe he's just down on his luck," he suggested, trying to defuse the situation. But the younger cop ignored him and pushed further. "You're hiding something. You show up out of nowhere, no ID, no history, but you're not like the others. You don't act scared, you don't even act desperate." Elon tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Is that a crime now?" The younger officer slammed his hand on the desk, the sound echoing through the precinct. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped, his voice rising. The room grew quiet again, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Elon's gaze didn't waver, and his composure only seemed to irritate the younger cop further. The older officer finally stepped in, placing a hand on his partner's shoulder. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Let's not turn this into something it doesn't need to be." The younger cop pulled away, muttering under his breath but backing off for now. The older officer turned back to Elon. "Look, Eli, we're just trying to figure out who you are. Help us out here, and we'll make this quick." Elon let out a soft sigh, as if contemplating his options. "I told you everything you asked," he said. "If that's not enough, I don't know what else to tell you." The older cop frowned but nodded. He didn't want to admit it, but he was beginning to feel uneasy about the whole situation. There was something about this man that didn't sit right, but it wasn't the usual kind of suspicion. Just then, the station door swung open, and a tall man in a sharp suit walked in, shaking the rain off his umbrella. His presence commanded immediate attention, and even the younger officer straightened up at the sight of him. The man scanned the room, his eyes locking onto Elon. Without hesitation, he approached the desk. "I'm here to collect Mr. Morrison," he said, his tone crisp and authoritative. The younger officer blinked in surprise. "Who are you?" "Mr. Morrison's attorney," the man replied smoothly, pulling out a sleek black business card and handing it over. The older cop looked at the card, then back at the man, his confusion deepening. "He didn't make any calls. How did you?" "That's irrelevant," the attorney interrupted, his gaze unwavering. "You've detained my client without cause. I suggest you release him immediately, or we'll be discussing this at a higher level." The room fell into stunned silence. The younger officer's face turned red, his indignation battling with his uncertainty. "You can't just walk in here and—" "I can," the attorney cut him off, his voice sharp. "And I have. Now, unless you'd like to explain to your superiors why you detained an innocent man, I suggest you follow procedure." Elon remained silent, his expression unreadable, as the two officers exchanged uneasy glances. The younger cop looked like he wanted to argue, but the older officer stepped forward, raising a hand. "All right," he said, his tone measured. "We'll release him." As the attorney handed over some papers and completed the necessary formalities, the younger cop leaned closer to his partner, whispering angrily, "This doesn't make sense. Who the hell gets a lawyer like that while living on the streets?" The older officer didn't respond. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had just let someone slip through their fingers, but not the kind of someone they'd usually be chasing. Elon stood, his movements calm and deliberate, and turned to the two officers. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said, his tone laced with subtle irony. The younger officer scowled, but the older one simply watched as Elon followed the attorney out the door. The rain was still falling as the two men stepped onto the street, the attorney opening an umbrella to shield them both. "Nicely done," Elon said quietly, his voice carrying a note of approval. The attorney gave a small nod but didn't speak. The two walked down the street, disappearing into the night, leaving the precinct and its officers with more questions than answers. The rain continued to pour as Elon and the attorney strode away from the precinct. The streets were quiet, illuminated by the dim glow of streetlights, their footsteps echoing against the wet pavement. Elon glanced sideways at the man walking beside him. "You played the part well," Elon remarked, his voice calm but carrying a hint of amusement. The attorney smirked, his professional demeanor slipping, just enough to reveal the man beneath the polished suit. "You pay me to be convincing, Mr. Musk," he replied. "But I have to ask, was this really necessary?" Elon stopped under a streetlight, his face partially shadowed. "Yes, it was," he said, his tone turning serious. "You can't understand people's true nature until you see how they treat someone with no power, no status." That officer, Elon paused, his jaw tightening for a moment. He showed exactly why systems fail. The attorney hesitated, clearly accustomed to a more conventional version of his billionaire client. "And the other one?" Elon's expression softened slightly. He had doubts. That's the seed of change. It's small, but it's something. The conversation ended as a sleek, black car pulled up beside them. The attorney opened the door for Elon, who slid into the back seat without another word. The car glided away, leaving the drenched streets and confused precinct behind. Inside the car, Elon leaned back, his mind racing. This wasn't just an experiment in disguise or a whim to test his boundaries. He was gathering data, real human data, on how authority figures interacted with the vulnerable. It wasn't just about fixing broken systems, it was about understanding how those systems broke in the first place. A soft chime broke the silence, pulling Elon from his thoughts. He glanced at his phone, where a secure message popped up. "Phase 2 in progress. Awaiting your instructions." His lips curved into a faint smile. This was only the beginning. The car turned into the underground garage of a high-rise building, sleek and modern, its stark lines a testament to Elon's own design philosophy. As the vehicle came to a halt, he stepped out and was greeted by his personal assistant, a sharp-eyed woman with a tablet in hand. "Everything went according to plan?" she asked, her tone more statement than question. "Mostly," Elon replied, striding toward the elevator. The younger officer was predictable. The older one surprised me. The assistant nodded, tapping on her tablet as she followed. "The data from the precinct is already being analyzed. We're cross-referencing it with your previous experiments." Elon stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with a soft whoosh. "Good," he said. "And the next test?" "Ready whenever you are," she replied, her voice steady. Elon's eyes narrowed, his mind already focused on the bigger picture. "Let's see how they react when the stakes are higher," he said, almost to himself. The elevator ascended smoothly, the numbers on the display climbing higher and higher. For Elon, this wasn't just about uncovering the flaws in the system, it was about designing something better. Something that didn't rely on fear or authority, but on trust and accountability. As the elevator doors opened, revealing the expansive, futuristic office that served as his headquarters, Elon felt a renewed sense of purpose. The night's events had been enlightening, but they were just one piece of a much larger puzzle. And Elon Musk wasn't just solving it, he was reshaping it. As Elon entered his expansive office, the floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a stunning view of the city drenched in rain. The sound of droplets tapping against the glass filled the room. His assistant lingered behind, awaiting further instructions, but Elon waved her off gently. "I need some time alone," he said, his voice quieter now. She nodded and left without another word, leaving Elon surrounded by the soft hum of his private workspace. He walked over to a central console, where a holographic interface sprang to life at his touch. A map of the city appeared, marked with pins representing data points, precincts, community centers, low-income neighborhoods, and more. Each pin pulsed faintly, representing a fragment of the larger social ecosystem he was studying. Elon zoomed into the precinct he had just left. The profiles of the two officers popped up, side by side. He studied them in silence. Officer Miller, age 46, 20 years on the force, numerous commendations, but also a string of complaints, most of them dismissed without investigation. Officer Daniels, age 29, relatively new, an impeccable record but noted for questioning authority during training sessions. Two sides of the same coin, Elon muttered to himself. One is a symptom of the disease, the other might just be the cure. His eyes shifted to a new notification blinking on the screen. It was footage from the precinct captured by a hidden device he had placed in his coat before the experiment. Elon clicked on it, and the grainy video played. The scene showed Officer Miller pacing in frustration after Elon's release. Who the hell does he think he is? Some homeless guy with a smart mouth, and now we're the bad guys. Daniels, standing nearby, looked uneasy. Maybe it's a wake-up call, he said quietly. Miller scoffed. A wake-up call? You'll learn soon enough, kid. People like him don't matter. They're just noise. Daniels didn't respond, but the subtle clench of his jaw spoke volumes. Elon paused the video and leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. Daniels wasn't just a potential ally, he was proof that change could happen from within, but it wouldn't be easy. A chime from the console interrupted his thoughts. Another secure message appeared. Unexpected development. Officer Daniels requested a private meeting. Shall we proceed? Elon's brow furrowed. He hadn't anticipated this twist. Why would Daniels reach out so soon? He tapped a quick reply. Proceed. Arrange a meeting on neutral ground. No security presence. The message sent, Elon stood and walked to the window, his reflection merging with the rain-soaked cityscape. He had always believed that systems were only as strong as the people who upheld them. Tonight he had seen both the rot and the resilience within the same walls. His thoughts drifted to Daniels. If this officer could be guided, perhaps he could spark change in others like him. But it was a gamble, a delicate balance between trust and control. As the rain began to let up, the city lights shimmered brighter, illuminating Elon's face. A faint smile played on his lips. The next step was risky, but risk was something he thrived on. Somewhere out there, Officer Daniels was grappling with his own doubts, unaware that his actions were now part of a much larger experiment. An experiment that could redefine not just his future, but the future of countless others. Elon turned away from the window and returned to his console. The game had just begun, and the next move was his to make. The following evening, Elon arrived at a small, unassuming cafe on the edge of the city. The location had been carefully chosen, neutral territory, quiet and far from prying eyes. He wore a plain jacket and jeans, blending in effortlessly with the casual crowd. No security, no entourage. Tonight it was just him and Daniels. The young officer was already seated at a cornered table, his back to the wall. He looked nervous, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his coffee cup. When Elon approached, Daniels stood abruptly, unsure whether to offer a handshake or a simple greeting. You made the effort to reach out, Elon said, sliding into the seat opposite him. I'm curious why. Daniels hesitated, then sat back down, his shoulders visibly tense. I don't know who you are, he began, his voice low, but I know you're not some random homeless guy. Elon raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. And what makes you think that? The way you handled yourself, Daniels replied, leaning in slightly. Most people in that situation would have been scared or angry. You were testing us. Elon didn't deny it. Instead, he stirred the coffee the waitress had just placed in front of him, letting the silence stretch. I guess what I'm trying to say is, I've been thinking about what happened, Daniels continued, his voice tinged with frustration. About how Officer Miller treated you, how we're trained to handle people like you or who we thought you were. And, Elon prompted, his gaze steady but non-judgmental. Daniels exhaled sharply. It's broken. The system, the training, the mindset, it's all broken. And if someone like me can see it, why hasn't anyone done anything about it? Elon leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. Maybe they don't see it. Or maybe they do, but they don't know how to fix it. Change is hard, Daniels. It's uncomfortable, and it comes at a cost. Are you willing to pay that cost? Daniels stared at him, the weight of the question sinking in. I don't know, he admitted after a moment. but I'm tired of being part of the problem. Elon nodded, his respect for the young officer growing. That's a start, he said simply. The conversation shifted, growing deeper as the minutes passed. Daniel spoke about his struggles on the force, the internal conflicts, the moments when he questioned his own integrity. Elon listened intently, offering no solutions but encouraging the officer to lay everything bare. Eventually, Daniels asked the question that had been gnawing at him since their first encounter. Who are you really? And why are you doing this? Elon smiled faintly, his eyes narrowing slightly. Let's just say I'm someone who believes in testing limits, not just of technology but of people. I needed to see how far you could be pushed before you'd push back. Daniels frowned, trying to piece together the cryptic answer. So this was all a setup? In a way, Elon admitted. But it was real enough, wasn't it? The choices you made, the doubts you felt, they weren't fake. That's what matters. Daniels shook his head, his frustration evident. And now what? You've got your data, your experiment. What happens to the rest of us? To the people stuck in this mess? Elon's expression turned serious. This isn't just about data. It's about creating a ripple effect. One person, one moment, can change everything if they act at the right time. You might be that person, Daniels. But only if you're willing to take the risk. Daniels sat back, his mind racing. He didn't fully understand what Elon was planning, but he couldn't deny the strange pull he felt, a sense that he was standing on the edge of something far bigger than himself. As the two men left the cafe, parting ways under the glow of a flickering street lamp, Daniels felt a strange mix of fear and hope. He didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was moving towards something meaningful. Elon watched him walk away, his mind already turning to the next step. Daniels was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture was far from complete. The real test was still to come. A week later, Elon sat alone in his study, reviewing the footage from his hidden cameras and microphones during the experiment. Each interaction, every word spoken by the officers, and the reactions of bystanders were meticulously analyzed. His face remained unreadable as he sifted through the data, pausing occasionally to jot down notes on a tablet. The experiment wasn't just about testing individuals, it was about exposing a pattern. The system, the culture, the blind spots, it all painted a disturbing picture. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the wall where a digital display projected live statistics on police reform efforts across the country. The numbers were bleak, but they weren't insurmountable. A sudden knock at the door broke his concentration. Without turning, Elon called out, "Come in." His assistant, Maria, entered, carrying a folder. She was one of the few people in his inner circle who knew about the experiment. "You're not going to believe this," she said, setting the folder down in front of him. Elon opened it, scanning the first few pages. His expression shifted slightly, curiosity mixed with concern. "This is from Daniels?" Maria nodded. "He filed a formal complaint against Officer Miller and a few others. But that's not all. He started gathering testimonies from his colleagues, anonymous ones. He's building a case, Elon, and it's gaining traction." Elon leaned forward, his interest piqued. He's putting himself on the line. That's not an easy thing to do in a system designed to protect its own. Maria hesitated before adding, "He's also been receiving threats, anonymous calls, messages. Someone doesn't want him to speak up." Elon's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't anticipated Daniels becoming a direct target so quickly. "Have you traced the threats?" "We're working on it," Maria replied. "But Daniels, he's scared. He didn't say it outright, but you can tell. He needs support." Elon sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Finally, he stood, his decision made. "Then we give him support, quietly for now. He's not in this alone." Maria nodded and left the room, leaving Elon to his thoughts. He knew the stakes were escalating. What had started as a test was evolving into something much bigger, a fight for accountability, fairness, and the integrity of a broken system. The following day, Elon arranged a private meeting with Daniels. This time they met in a more discreet location, a nondescript office in a quiet part of town. Daniels looked more tense than before, the weight of recent events etched into his features. "I hear you've been busy," Elon began, his tone light but probing. Daniels sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. But now it's getting messy. People are watching me, questioning me. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." Elon leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You've already done more than most people would. But if you want to see this through, you'll need allies." Daniels frowned. "And where am I supposed to find those? Everyone's too scared to stick their necks out." A faint smile crossed Elon's face. Leave that to me. Over the next few days, Elon began assembling a team, a mix of legal experts, activists, and former law enforcement officers who shared a common goal: systemic change. They worked behind the scenes, building a support network for Daniels and others like him. At the same time, Elon quietly leveraged his influence to amplify the story. News outlets began picking up whispers of a young officer challenging corruption within his precinct. Social media buzzed with speculation, and hashtags supporting Daniels started trending. But with attention came danger. Late one night, Daniels received a chilling message on his phone: "Stop now, or you'll regret it." Shaken, he called Elon, his voice trembling. "I can't do this anymore. They're coming after me." "You can?" Elon replied firmly. "Because you're not alone. Trust me, Daniels, this fight is bigger than both of us, and we're going to win." Daniels hesitated, then took a deep breath. "All right, what's the next step?" Elon's voice was calm, almost reassuring. "The next step is to let the truth speak for itself. But first, we need to protect you." As the call ended, Elon's mind raced. The stakes were higher than ever, and the risks were mounting. But he knew one thing for certain: the truth had a way of cutting through even the darkest lies. And he was determined to see it shine. The tension escalated as the threats against Daniels became more overt. His car tires were slashed outside his apartment one night, and strange vehicles began lingering near his home. Daniels wasn't just scared, he was exhausted. Each day felt like a gamble, and he was unsure if the risk was worth the reward. Elon, meanwhile, worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He instructed his security team to keep a discreet yet vigilant watch over Daniels. They installed surveillance cameras around his home and assigned plainclothes personnel to follow him during his daily routine. Elon had a habit of going all in, and this time was no different. Daniels wasn't just a pawn in a larger experiment. He was now someone Elon genuinely wanted to protect. At the same time, Elon's team of legal experts and activists started strategizing their next moves. They knew they needed to shift public attention toward the deeper issues. Stories of systemic problems in law enforcement had surfaced before but were often swept under the rug. This time, Elon was determined to use his influence to keep the spotlight firmly on the injustices Daniels had exposed. One evening, Elon called Daniels. His voice was steady, calm. "Daniels, I need you to trust me on this. Tomorrow, I'm holding a press conference. I'm going to tell the world what happened." Daniels froze. "What? You're putting this out there? But my name?" "Your name won't come up." "Not yet," Elon assured him. "For now, it's about the bigger picture. The truth. I want people to know what's really happening behind closed doors. And when the time comes, you won't stand alone." The next day, in front of a sea of reporters and cameras, Elon stood behind a podium. He didn't wear his usual polished suit. Instead, he dressed simply, letting the weight of his words carry the message. He began by recounting his experiment the night he posed as a homeless man and the encounters that followed. The room grew quieter with every detail he revealed. When he spoke about Daniels, though not by name, he described him as a young officer brave enough to challenge a flawed system. "I didn't expect to meet someone like him," Elon said, his voice filled with conviction. "But what I witnessed wasn't just one man's courage, it was a glimpse of what could happen if more people stood up. If accountability wasn't just a word we throw around, but something we demanded." The press erupted with questions, but Elon didn't stay long. His message was clear, and now it was out in the world. Daniels watched the broadcast from his living room, his hands gripping the armrest of his chair. A mix of emotions swirled within him: relief, fear, and a strange sense of hope. For the first time, he didn't feel completely alone in this fight. But the backlash came swiftly. Within hours, social media lit up with both praise and criticism for Elon's speech. Some called him a hero, while others accused him of meddling in matters he didn't fully understand. Meanwhile, within Daniels' precinct, whispers turned into open hostility. His fellow officers began treating him like an outcast, and even his closest allies started to distance themselves. Elon, undeterred, took the next step. He reached out to lawmakers, urging them to investigate the precinct Daniels worked in. He arranged for anonymous testimonies from other officers who had experienced similar pressures to stay silent. Slowly, the tide began to turn. But then, something unexpected happened. Late one night, while reviewing new evidence with Maria, Elon received a call from Daniels. "Elon," Daniels began, his voice tense. "Something's not right. I think they're setting me up." Elon's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean?" "I overheard a conversation today. They're planning to pin something on me. Something big. I don't know what, but I need help." Elon's mind raced. This was the move he had been anticipating but dreading. "Stay put," he said. "Don't go anywhere unless absolutely necessary. I'll handle this." Within hours, Elon mobilized his legal team. They filed an emergency request for whistleblower protection, and private investigators began digging into the activities of the precinct. What they uncovered was far worse than anyone had imagined, a web of corruption that went far beyond Daniel's case. The story was no longer just about one brave officer or one tech mogul's social experiment. It was about unraveling a system of power and secrecy that had long gone unchecked. And Elon knew that the fight was just beginning. The investigation took on a life of its own, quickly spiraling into a media frenzy. As more evidence surfaced, the story of the corrupt police precinct became a national headline. The public's outrage grew, with calls for reform echoing across every social media platform. People demanded accountability, and for the first time in years it seemed like real change might be possible. But with the media attention came dangerous consequences. The officers involved in the corruption began retaliating, both publicly and privately. Daniels became more of a target than ever before. He was pulled into an office one afternoon, where a senior officer, Captain Harris, sat across from him with a stern look. "You think this is a game?" Harris asked, his tone icy. "You think you can expose us and walk away without consequences?" Daniels stayed silent, his hands clenched at his sides. "You think Musk will save you?" Harris continued, leaning forward. "He's playing with fire. And when it all burns down, you'll be the one left holding the ashes." Daniels stood up slowly. "Maybe it's time for the fire." He walked out of the office, his resolve hardening. He had come this far, he wasn't going to back down now. But he knew that the danger had escalated to a point where even his safety couldn't be taken for granted. Elon's support had been crucial, but the stakes had become too high for him to be an invisible player behind the scenes anymore. Elon, ever vigilant, watched from afar as the situation unfolded. He knew that Daniels was in danger, but he also understood the fragility of the situation. Any wrong move could tip the balance and turn the fight for justice into an insurmountable battle. That night, as Elon sat in his office, reviewing the latest news on the situation, his phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but he picked it up. "Elon," Daniel's voice was shaky, his usual confidence now replaced by fear. "I think I'm being followed. I saw the same car outside my apartment twice today." Elon's mind raced. "Stay calm. Don't go home tonight. Go somewhere safe anywhere. I'll have someone meet you." Daniels hesitated but then agreed. The last thing he needed was to be vulnerable. Within minutes, Elon dispatched his security team to pick Daniels up. They moved quickly and silently, ensuring Daniels was safe, but Elon knew this was just the beginning. He had to act fast before things escalated further. Elon immediately called in his top legal team and activated his media connections. He wasn't going to let Daniels' life become collateral damage in a system that had already failed him. As Daniels' whereabouts were kept under wraps, Elon launched the next phase of his plan. He organized a meeting with key journalists who had been covering the case, ensuring they understood the gravity of what was unfolding. "Keep the pressure on," Elon told them. "We need this story to stay alive, louder than ever. Public outcry is our only weapon now." Days passed, and Daniels remained hidden, his whereabouts known only to Elon's closest circle. The corruption within the precinct started to unravel in the most unexpected way. A whistleblower from within the police department, a senior officer who had grown disillusioned with the system, came forward. He provided damning evidence that not only confirmed Daniels' claims but also revealed the extent of the corruption. It was a game changer. The officer, whose identity remained protected, took to a national news station to speak out. "What Daniels uncovered is only the tip of the iceberg," he said. "What you don't know is how deep the corruption goes. We've been protecting criminals, blackmailing civilians, and covering up violent acts, and we've done it all in the name of keeping the peace." The public's fury exploded. Protests erupted in major cities demanding justice and reform. People no longer saw Daniels as just an officer. They saw him as a symbol of the fight against a broken system. But while the public rallied behind him, the officers who had been exposed didn't go down without a fight. They fought back in the shadows, trying to discredit the whistleblower and paint Daniels as a liar. They even attempted to plant false evidence to make it look like Daniels was complicit in the crimes he was exposing. Elon wasn't fooled. He worked tirelessly to protect Daniels and his team, all the while ensuring that the evidence didn't get buried in the chaos. As the public's focus intensified, Elon began drafting a proposal for reform, something that could shake the foundation of the entire system. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but with Daniels' courage, they were inching closer to real change. Then came the moment Elon had been preparing for. He gathered the media for one final press conference, ready to make the boldest statement of his career. The world was watching. Daniels, now out of hiding, stood beside him. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. Elon Musk isn't here to fix the police, Elon began, looking into the cameras. I'm here to make sure the system does what it's supposed to do, serve and protect. And if that means tearing it down and rebuilding it from the ground up, so be it. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling in. Elon wasn't just playing a role in someone's story, he was rewriting the narrative of a broken society. As the press conference concluded, Daniels turned to Elon. You think we can really change this? He asked, still unsure of the magnitude of what lay ahead. Elon looked at him, a flicker of resolve in his eyes. We're not just changing the system, we're changing the people who make it up. And that's where the real power lies. The press conference reverberated across the nation, sending shockwaves through both political and law enforcement circles. People were divided. Some hailed Elon and Daniels as heroes, while others accused them of trying to tear down the very institutions that upheld the law. The media storm grew fiercer with each passing hour, and the tension between the reformists and the entrenched powers became palpable. Elon knew the stakes had never been higher. Back in the city, Daniels found himself thrust into the spotlight more than he ever imagined. His every move was scrutinized by the public, while the corrupt officers who had been exposed plotted in the shadows. Daniels was no longer just a police officer. He was now the face of justice, the embodiment of a movement that demanded transparency and accountability. Yet with the newfound recognition came an undeniable weight on his shoulders. One evening, as Daniels sat in his apartment, reviewing the flood of messages and news articles about the case, his phone buzzed. It was a message from an anonymous number. You don't know who's watching, do you? The text read, keep pushing, and you'll regret it. Your life won't be the only one destroyed. His heart raced. It wasn't the first threat he'd received, but this felt different, darker. His mind instantly flashed to the officers he had exposed, the powerful figures who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. He had to be careful. The lines between justice and danger were blurring fast. As he sat in silence, contemplating his next move, Elon's call came through. Daniels, are you okay? Elon's voice crackled with concern. We need to talk about your security. Things are escalating. I'm fine, Daniels lied, forcing a calm tone. But there's something off. I can feel it. I've been getting threats. And this one, it feels different. Elon's silence spoke volumes. He understood the gravity of the situation. You're not in this alone. We'll take care of it. You focus on what's next. The country's watching, and we can't afford to lose momentum. Daniels wasn't sure whether he was more frightened by the threats or by the enormity of the responsibility that had landed on his shoulders. Yet, he couldn't stop now. Too much was at stake. The corrupt system was finally being exposed, and the nation was listening. But the deeper he dug, the darker the path became. The next few days were a blur of meetings, interviews, and constant surveillance. Daniels could barely leave his apartment without a security team in tow. But even with the extra protection, the threats kept coming. Then, a week after the press conference, the unthinkable happened. Daniels' car was found completely torched, a message written across the wreckage, stop or die. The police, now under intense pressure to investigate their own, were unwilling to move quickly, and Elon's team knew they couldn't trust the system to protect Daniels. They needed to act fast. Elon brought in private security specialists to move Daniels to a safe house on the outskirts of the city, far away from the prying eyes of the press and those who sought to silence him. Despite the danger, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that his fight was far from over. He had exposed the police, but the real battle lay in the aftermath, the struggle to rebuild trust and establish new systems. As he stayed hidden, Elon continued to push forward with his vision, meeting with lawmakers, discussing strategies for police reform, and pushing to hold the corrupt officers accountable. Meanwhile, Daniel spent his days in isolation, his mind racing with ideas for the future. His fight wasn't just about exposing corruption, it was about creating a future where no one would have to live in fear of the very people meant to protect them. He began to plan the next steps, knowing that his journey was just beginning. One day, as he sat alone in the quiet safe house, his phone buzzed again. It was a video message from Elon. Elon's voice said, calm and steady, I've been in talks with Congress. We have the momentum. It's time to make our next move. You're the face of this revolution, and we can't let them win. You need to come out of hiding. Daniels hesitated. He wanted to stay safe, but he knew Elon was right. The public had waited long enough. If he remained hidden, it would send the wrong message. The revolution needed him to be a visible symbol of resistance. I'm ready, Daniels said quietly, his voice filled with determination. Let's do this. The next day, Daniels reemerged into the public eye, appearing at a rally organized by Elon's team. As he stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into applause, their cheers a powerful affirmation of the movement he had come to represent. But the road ahead was fraught with obstacles. Daniels knew the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. With Elon by his side, Daniels addressed the crowd, his voice unwavering. "We stand here today not just for ourselves, but for every person who has ever been wronged by a system that was meant to protect them," Daniels said, his words carrying the weight of the people's struggles. "This is our moment. This is our time to change the world. And no matter what happens, we will keep fighting." The crowd roared in agreement, and for the first time in a long time, Daniels felt hope rise within him. The fight was far from over, but he wasn't alone. And with Elon's unwavering support, he was ready to face whatever came next. The battle for justice was just beginning, and the world was watching.